if they're behaving in negative ways, that's communication. They're letting you know something's not right with the environment potentially, right? It might not be it's not about you correcting their behavior. It's about you learning from them. And I think that fundamental, kind of physiological idea, like that awareness, you should really use that philosophy broadly, socioculturally, right? There's nothing wrong with the kid. Think about the forces that this kid's dealing with.
Welcome to the Soaring Child Podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm your host, Dana Kay. Hello parents, this is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child Podcast. Now, having a neurodiverse child can pose many challenges, as I'm sure all of our listeners know. Challenges at home, challenges in life, challenges with friends, and challenges in school. Now, as parents, most of us want to be able to set our child up for success, especially when it comes to learning. But knowing how to do this can be a huge undertaking, especially when this is not our area of expertise. And this is why today I'm happy to introduce our next guest that can help us navigate this. After thousands of hours working one-on-one with students, Ian Siegel came to a simple realization. Amid students' worries about being evaluated and being perceived as good enough to be accepted at an elite college, on social media, or among friends, students have lost sight of what makes them so special. Their incredible, unique capacity to learn. Ian employs an unconventional but extremely effective approach to excavating the incredible learner that exists in each student he works with, which sounds amazing. He is the CEO of Streamline Learning and the creator of the iSavant assessment. Now it's time to welcome Ian Siegel to the Soaring Child. Hi, Ian. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Donna, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. Look, we haven't had, someone come in and talk with us about tutoring. And so when we met, I was really excited to get you on to the podcast to really just explore this topic, because I know for me, look, we don't have a lot of challenges with my son anymore, which is amazing. But I know for me, when we were, school was a big thing. Getting him to be motivated to do schoolwork or homework was such a huge task. Is this something that you see with students coming in and working with them?
Absolutely, especially these days post-pandemic. I think that there's a tendency toward procrastination, a tendency toward kind of just being in honestly either depressed or anxious places more and more often with these kids, and also obviously distracted places, which I increasingly am seeing as an emotional response more than anything to your environment, a reaction to your environment in whatever way. So absolutely. At the same time, imagine me and any tutor who's been around for a decade and has gotten very good at what they're doing, especially within the realm of test prep, SAT, ACT, ISEE, all that stuff. We tend to end up working, anybody who's been around long enough, tend to end up working with neurodiverse children more than anyone. So it's this amazing window I've gotten to have over the past decade, where I'm spending, hours at a time, an hour and a half every week with students. And all of my tutors are also with students who are neurodiverse. And, in that situation, really using it as a learning experience for ourselves. Because, what a freaking opportunity to really just spend an hour, nothing else is going on, no cell phones, no nothing, and just really paying attention to how their brains work. And what I see is that the anxiety and ADHD part also happens with students on the high school level as they get closer and closer to college admissions and the college of application process. The level of perfection that seems to be kind of the foundation of having options for elite colleges or anything like that, really plays a kind of a dramatic impact negatively on students' ability to learn. So what I'm seeing is not even kids who are struggling to get A's. That's not the problem. It's more like, struggling to accept themselves and then really kind of developing an intellectual identity beyond what they're just supposed to do. And it has some pretty interesting consequences, even just around like the process of learning how to read. Because what I notice is that a lot of students who by the time they're in high school don't have enough time to read it outside of school suddenly start this process of reading for other people besides themselves. In other words, they're trying to find meaning that will be seen as impactful by the teacher, their peers, pretty much anyone but themselves. So like when they confront something like a standardized test, I'm seeing these kids who have a ton of cognitive capacity, not at their reading ability compared relative to what they could be. And so it's this crazy situation because they're so used to being like, hey, is this good enough? Can I just get away with reading these couple words and saying this thing so that you think I've gotten it, instead of deeply understanding the reading for themselves. So I think that's the big problem I see today, is just that even kids who are cognitively, I see all over the map. And I'm really not convinced that we really know how brilliant kids are at this point, because we're only seeing the effects of their environment, of institutions like school that I simply think don't do the job that they could be doing, especially for neurodiverse students. So I think personally, I've been blessed and cursed with this weird ability to know people's capacities agnostic to how they're acting right now. And every time, and so like imagine my business, I'm like, you could be scoring 300 points higher on the SAT, and I freaking know it, and I'm always right. So it's like, and I prove it out to these families, and they're like, holy cow, what you're saying is real. We don't get that from a test prep classroom. And so like I've basically been really internalizing this. I'm like, wow, no, once we start to really pay attention to environmental factors, especially with students who are neurodiverse, there's an incredible bend in how students can transform to really kind of get in touch with their brilliance. And I've been obsessed with it ever just by observing these students thousands of hours over the past decade.
So is that what sparked your interest in researching this brilliance?
So yeah, so with the Brilliant Brain Institute, that's our new nonprofit where we are charging forward, looking at the genetic and epigenetic factors that are impacting both brilliance and, well, I guess kind of neurological distress is what I'm noticing, kind of in various forms, that people are more vulnerable and predisposed to each of those things. So watching this over and over again and experiencing deeply that the kids who are the most brilliant are often the most distracted, the most anxious and all that. And I'm like, this is just slapping me in the face. And in a way that I can't stand. Also, I was frustrated because the thing that seems to be my mission in life is to help people reach their potential. And I'm staring at these kids and I'm like, and I could break it down to you in boring ways, but like just simple strategies, simple behavior changes on the test. Forget complicated ideas. They're not changing their behaviors. In one-on-one tutoring, not nearly as quickly as students who we don't think of as classically as brilliant, because the learning piece is the challenge. It's like they show up with a lot in the tank, but in terms of actually like incorporating new behaviors, integrating new perspectives, a lot of these students who have so much capacity are fundamentally inhibited by the fact that their brains are under fire pretty much. And that's what I noticed. And I'm like, especially as you get good as a tutor, you're like, this isn't my fault. Hold on a second, because I see when it works and I start to see when it doesn't. And you start to see that there's these very similar behavior patterns in the students for whom, learning isn't happening at a lightning pace like I'm used to within the one-on-one tutoring situation. So that's the thing. It was the frustration where I said, oh, and then there was the personal reality where I realized the thing that was wrong with me is the thing that a lot of people are struggling with. And I realized that my students were really a mirror to me, and that I was having trouble learning too. And
So it
and
was
so it
like
was this
this.
big aha moment for me. Yeah, just and that
Yes.
and then I'm like, I need to research this. Long story
Yeah.
short, yeah.
So you started this research. So tell me about this. What are you uncovering in some of those? I know you mentioned genetics and epigenetics. Just explain to the listeners what that means
Sure.
and what you're uncovering as a part of this research.
Sure. So anecdotally, and the in the very beginning science, so there's nothing kind of I can say concretely yet, but even if we go back to research that has already been established, is that there HLA haplotypes on chromosome 6, there are a ton that are associated with everything from autism to dyslexia to ADHD to just the gamut of things. And they're just it's about 20 to 30 of these and that are susceptible to these kinds of diseases. And what I'm finding, or what the problem with the research so far, is they're not controlling for environmental factors when trying to establish the connection between, basically cognitive giftedness and the presence of these genetic factors. So what I'm interested in is, like, once you control for the environmental factors, and just so our listeners know, what I'm talking about is basically toxin exposure that undermines brain function and creates a whole host of problems, including hormone imbalances, and, as Donna knows, kind of then the resulting gut dysfunction and et cetera, which is just pretty much just like your house is on fire. But backing up, I think that um, we've already started to see that there's overlapping HLA types between what I just mentioned, all those kind of challenges psychologically and learning disability wise, with HLA types that have to do with toxic mold exposure. And so
Mm-hmm.
my hypothesis is that instead of it being kind of limited to the ones that we know have to do with this disease called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, also called biotoxin illness, which Dr. Shoemaker and Maryland pioneered all of this very important work. But that toxins, neurotoxin exposure and stress, chronic stress, are turning on these HLA types beyond the ones that we know are associated with chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So as if that, like, all negative things in your brain can be explained by a reaction to your environment. And it's not
You,
you. It's not
yep,
you at all. And
yes.
even negative thoughts. That's what I'm noticing about myself. I'm like, I don't have any negative thoughts anymore. Hardly at all, as I've gotten better from
Mm-hmm.
this, going through this protocol, that, and me being more careful about my environment, and honestly in subscribing to the religion of, I'm putting my own brilliance first. Everything else, backseat. That's
Yeah.
it. And I'm telling you, I would never give that up. People are very slow to switch over to what I'm talking about. This level of basically treating yourself as a baby, knowing that babies are brilliant, and recognizing that this is the key to unlocking the brilliance that you had in the beginning of your life. And it's just like, I think it's a way of life. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something, it's an elite club, because you're not just paving the way for yourself, but for your children. I'm telling
Yeah.
you,
You
learning
are
is a
preaching.
family thing.
It is. You're preaching to the choir here, Ian. And look, listeners, here we have a guy who is a tutor of, a decade of experience, all of a sudden realizing that there are these other factors that could be contributing to children's ability to learn. And I think that this is amazing. That full circle of, like, realizing it's not just their brain or their smarts or their whatever it may be. It is also a factor of what's going on in the environment. Now, let's just we talk about environmental toxins, we talk about genetics a lot on the podcast. I actually did an amazing episode with Kashif Khan, who is the CEO of a genetic company that I use inside the business, and we went down that in deep. And so I really want to use today more so to talk about strategies that our listeners can use when, bar all this genetic aside, what listeners can use to really unlock that brilliance for their child. Can you share some of those strategies for us? I mean, you've got years and years of experience in helping students with their self-perception, with their motivation, with their limiting beliefs, because I know kids these days do have that limiting belief. And so, what are some of those tried and tested and true strategies that work?
Absolutely. So these are the things I really dive into with my book, School Sucks, Your Child Doesn't. How to Unlock Your Child's Untapped Potential.
I love the title. Because it does.
No.
The schools does suck.
It's just, once we feel you can just let go and say it kind of feels good. And you start to realize that you've been judging your child and yourself within the framework of an institution that doesn't get the job done, and you're in the whole time you're beating yourself up about it. So I think, yes, Donna, thanks for asking this. I think this gets at the heart of just the two-sided parts of learning, which is one, it's a physiological, biological thing. It has to do with brain health. Let's change our neurological environment so that they can work, that would be nice, right? So step one. Step two is realizing that our society, because our brain health isn't great, we've been making some weird decisions. Entire institutions are kind of just like screwed up. And like what we've been telling our kids, how we think about our kids, fundamentally limiting our children's abilities from day one. So I'll kind of just break down the sociocultural realities that are playing into this and kind of move through a child's life to kind of help people kind of understand how I'm seeing it, looking at the other end, being the tutor who also has helped kids get into college, kind of noticing like, whoa, this could be a little bit better for this kid. Kind of saying, here are the warning signs. So what I would say first and foremost, it kind of gets at the heart of what Donna and I were talking about in terms of the neurological basis. What if all the negative stuff that's going on with your kid, what if your assumption is, my kid's perfect? And in the sense that like I unconditionally accept them. Negative stuff that's if they're behaving in negative ways, that's communication. They're letting you know something's not right with the environment potentially, right? It might not be it's not about you correcting their behavior. It's about you learning from them. And I think that fundamental, kind of physiological idea, like that awareness, you should really use that philosophy broadly, socioculturally, right? There's nothing wrong with the kid. Think about the forces that this kid's dealing with. They have a cell phone in their hand. They're getting judged in school, by their peers, where it's just this kind of circus and kind of a theater where it's more about proving what you know rather than actually like doing the hard work of running into a wall and realizing you didn't get it and then learning, picking yourself up and figuring it out, like authentic learning. So I think it's really just practicing two things as much as you can, trying to move away from protection in the sense of, hey, this is what I learned from my life. And so you need to do the same things to be okay, right? And to instead think about protection should be protecting the child's environment. But all of that energy where you're focused on, hey, match up, and hey, are you reading at the right time? Are you, getting the right grades at the right time? Put all of that aside. Reinvest that energy in the protection of the environment on multiple levels, both the physiological environment, but also be aware that the environment that school presents and other environments that are just kind of fundamentally toxic are not going to be helpful to your kids' learning development. And I know there's this idea that throw them in a hard situation and see if they come out, and that's what learning is. but you have to be aware, especially with neurodiverse students who are just fundamentally more sensitive. The things that are stressors for them might be more like significant than you might even be anticipating because they are fine tuned instruments, that they can perceive things that other people can't perceive. And so you need to think about, hey, that it's not just throwing these kids into a situation that doesn't work and is tough and see if they get out of it. And that's the kind of, hazing process that we need to do for our children. It's instead really making them feel okay in this life, because you have to realize that if you don't really give that strong message of self-acceptance, then the percentage of time their brain will be devoted to, am I okay? And then worrying about that, insecure, and then either falling into distracted, anxious, or depressed patterns as a reaction to it, kind of getting elevated and activated in that sense. It's crazy. And you see it so clearly in one-on-one tutoring. Completely. It's just so obvious, something that you don't necessarily get to see in school. Just seeing a kid just react so strongly to things. Yeah.
I know they do. And I just want to stop you there for a second. I do say a lot that symptoms are a warning sign from the body that something else is wrong. And I love that you started this with, as parents, we need to let go of all of our expectations of this child. They are not us. They are not going to follow the same path that we went through as a child. Because we met a milestone at a certain time doesn't mean they have to. And love them unconditionally and focus on the environment around them, protecting them from the things that actually can make their symptoms worse. And so I love that you started with that, because this is exactly, what I teach, what I preach. And, I find it really, really interesting because, again, you are a tutor. You are not in nutrition. You're not in holistic health. You're not in natural health. But you, as an individual, as a tutor, has picked this up themselves to say, hold on, there's something fundamentally wrong. And I agree that, schooling, it's this box that we're trying to fit every kid into. And I just think it's completely wrong, to get, I've got two boys. My 13-year-old was the one that was diagnosed when he was 4 with ADHD. He's thriving. He's in middle school. He's doing amazing. My 9-year-old doesn't have ADHD, but, he's a 9-year-old boy, and we're asking him to sit down at a desk, at a table all day long. And, I just got an email from his teacher saying that he's been chatting with his friends too much and laughing and giggling. And I'm like, well, he's a 9-year-old boy. That's okay. That's what they're to be doing.
I would take that. If I may interrupt for 1 second, I would take that a step further. That in fact, in that classroom, the best learning experience that your son could have is by interacting with his friends, not by halfway paying attention to the old fart up front. Just fundamentally, that's what we're robbing kids of. We're robbing kids of their time together in actually productive ways. They should be playing, really just trust that they'll be learning through that, and also doing group projects together, but not sitting in a classroom together for no reason. They should just be at home, or better, working with a tutor, even virtually. And that's the basis of our research, is that we are trying to prove out that brilliant students, neurodiverse students, should be thinking about tutoring academies, and they should be thinking about a fundamental different way of learning, in terms of having tutors, having peers to collaborate with, but not being forced into the box that you mentioned. So absolutely.
Yeah. So, that's obviously a main issue with schooling today for K-12. Can you see any other issues that we haven't discussed already on, issues with that environment? Did this just open up a can of worms?
Well, I think when people are struggling to learn, and people are in positions where they're not really able to really get to know one another, what happens is a lot of scapegoating. And this happens on so many levels. So I'll give you a really bland example. A parent has a kid that comes to work with us. This kid has straight A's, must be great. The parents spend $40,000 a year at private school. they come in with a SAT score that's below the national average, below, coming from the top 1% of families and all of that, right? Think about like everything, all the emotions that are involved right there, right? At that moment, imagine like what could be going on. In my opinion, from my framework, I'm like, okay, does this kid have mold brain? Like that's literally like is the top, like is that playing a role, right? Is learning a problem? Are there social cultural factors that are really impeding this kid from like being where they should be? Because like, and especially if we have a cognitive assessment on the other side, which we always have on kids saying, screaming, yeah, should be fine. So like, what's the problem? So imagine like if unless I'm able to like get a parent to realize all these factors, which is imagine if this kid is having trouble learning, the parent is also going to have trouble like coming to new awarenesses, right? So like imagine, so what they will do is imagine this kid's not learning as fast as the parents anticipating because they're like, I already paid for private school. And all you got to do is show them the tricks. And if they don't know the trick, if they're not getting the tricks, again, these kids can't read. They're thinking if they don't know the tricks, well, that's your fault as a tutor. And I'm going to stop working with your tutoring company, right? And then that's it, right? Like, but what they're doing is, and then they're saying, hey, and we're a virtual tutoring company, so they'll scapegoat. They're like, the reason why this didn't work was that you're virtual. My kid needs in-person learning, right? And I think that there's some valid stuff around in-person learning. I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying that wasn't the issue 99% of the time, but people are led to scapegoat because they don't know what the real thing is, and they're stressed by the process. So I think that's just like a micro or just kind of a microcosm of like how parent, school, kid, and tutoring company interact in interesting ways, just based on the way that school doesn't work and the fact that parents are not so pleased with the fact and not willing to look that plainly, and especially if they're putting in 40K a year into school. So but I mean beyond that, I mean you just look at how kids are just like there's just this skin deep level of analysis that's happening among kids, and just like saying, hey, so much worry about race and ethnicity and just identity politics, that it's like no one's really like like would never be a problem if people really got to know each other. They're like, I don't feel like I need this special label one way or the other. I feel like people love me and I'm part of the community. I'm good. Right. So all with what I find is through tutoring, kids get from point A to point B, very scared and insecure, to being like, hey, I'm good. I'm honestly ready to follow my heart again. So I think important pieces there.
Yeah, definitely. And so I know that you work a lot with SATs and standardizing testing. How do you think ADHD impacts a child's ability to sort of take a standardized test? And what parents can actually do about that?
Absolutely. So I'll just give you a quick strategy here that's specific to students with ADHD. So imagine that when you're reading a problem, there is a high likelihood that you'll be distracted during the process of actually reading. So you might miss a couple words. Every single word counts because these are tricky questions in these tests. So what happens is a student who has ADHD will end up looking at a question that they perfectly could do if they had read the question correctly. And then they're like, what is going on here? They're completely lost. And then they spend 3 to 4 minutes trying to figure it out. Read the question again, seeing it in the exact same way that they saw it the first time. The key there, is to not to realize, wait, if something is wrong here, again, this goes back to the same thing. I'm not the problem, right? To trust that and to be like, oh, it's just my brain kind of misread something at some level. Skip it, go away, come back to it. So you should treat your brain like a broken lawnmower or like a half working one where it's like, okay, it's not going to hit every blade of grass. That's fine. Don't force yourself. Don't get in perfectionism mode. Be like, okay, I'm just going to go around the yard and come back and then see how the lawnmower works next time around. See if it chops down that last blade of grass there. So I think that fundamental strategy, just being aware of your own like cognitive dysfunction a little bit, and just like, and also the fact, and this is the piece that people don't think about, is that that also plays into a strength that people with ADHD that tend to have, is that by seeing something space in between, you're providing a chance for that information to slip from conscious reality into your subconscious. That's where you're dangerous, as you know, and then boom, come back, you immediately see what you're missing before. I see it all the time. And you can tell when you review questions with students, because you just pull a question up and they're like, oh, I misread it, it's this. And it's like obvious. So it's just about seeing something twice within the test and giving yourself that opportunity.
And I like that. I like that idea of, teaching the student that if you can't get it within a short period of time, just move on and keep going and then come back around. Because, yeah, you are right that you definitely see things differently once you've stepped away from it. But if you're constantly trying to sort of, I don't know, use the terminology, beat a dead horse. Is that an Australian thing or is that an American thing?
No, it's American too. It's safe
okay,
here. Yeah,
good. I really have to be careful sometimes. Some of the things that come out of my mouth, I'm like, do you know what well, I'm glad that you know what I mean there. But, I think that's a really, really great strategy that you can share with the listeners out there. I want to ask another question, and this is one that we get asked a lot. We've got these kids that have been working hard all day trying to focus at school, and they get home and then they have to do homework, and a lot of them are they're done by that time. They just don't want to do it. It causes tantrums, it causes meltdowns. So, can you just talk to us about what parents can do in that situation? How can they sort of set up and structure that home environment that, homework isn't a battle every day?
Yeah, and for me, again, I think this gets back to the whale of school. That's the problem, because they could be learning a lot faster. It shouldn't be taking the whole day. There should be no homework. It could be just the tutor, and just, all of school and homework could be condensed into 3 hours a day, and that would be it. But putting that aside within the framework of kind of what we're kind of dealing with right now for most families, honestly, I think that it's really being aware of the state of your child's brain and during what time of the day. So imagine, for a kid with ADHD, by the end of the day, especially some like more serious ADHD, like I've seen, I call it the twilight hour, where like their meds wear off and like things go, woo, and so like imagine tutoring in that hour and you're like, oh my goodness gracious, right? So I think just being realistic about what you can do when. And so and again, as someone who previously struggled with ADHD before I got better, I did this consistently in high school and colleges. I would wake up early to do my homework. I would be aware that my brain was just fundamentally better in the morning hours, and anything that was relatively challenging in terms of homework and studying, I would just make that a habit. And I know that's kind of like a crazy thing for some children, but it's really about really switching things to going to bed earlier and waking up earlier, because those hours that you get before 12 p.m. are more valuable in terms of really getting the REM cycles going. And then on the other side, when you wake up, that those morning hours consistently, when you get into that, once you're into that system consistently, you'll have better brain power during those times. So again, if you're not able to fundamentally change your brain and your neurological environment, so that's not such a problem, then working within school and working within, having probably some reactions to toxins going on, some brain inflammation, you got to work within the hours at work, basically. Mm-hmm. I really fundamentally believe that it's kind of simple that way. And also, and I would say this even about parents, like recognizing that if your brain is not in the best state, then there's going to be this gap between expectation for what you're able to do in a day and what you're actually able to do. And it's stressful. So you're going to have to let go of some things and just say, I really need to focus on what's the most important, recognize where my brain's at today, and then pull that information together and go. Because you can still move the dial forward even when you're in a bad spot. You just have to kind of work with what you got.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because you've got. I asked on my Facebook not long ago, are you a night owl or are you an early bird? And you get all different responses to that. But really, if you're an early bird, work with that. If you are a night owl, work with that. And I will say also, when kids get home from school, they're hungry, their blood sugar has tanked, they need some protein. And so, also giving a bit of snack to help them, to boost them up, give them a bit of a break, and they may do better for you. But finding that time where your kid is at their best, perfect time to be doing homework. You've mentioned a few times, Ian, about the sort of one-to-one model where, it's different from school. And, if you could focus on that one-to-one and do 2 to 3 hours and get it all done in the day. Can you just expand a little bit on that? What do you offer that service? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. Streamline Learning is exclusively one-on-one virtual tutoring with expert level tutors. We call what we do savant tutoring because it's focused on really helping like the learner develop and really bringing out the brilliance in children, in addition to really helping them develop the skills that are helpful for the things that count. I think if you just kind of to conceptualize one-on-one tutoring versus the classroom in terms of like what's meaningful for the student. Two things I would point out just to start with. There's so many to talk about, but to start with, one is imagine being asked 150 questions in an hour. Critical thinking questions, like really like again about the concepts that you're learning. So this is the process of integration that happens with tutoring that fundamentally doesn't happen in school. So what I mean by integration is that instead of just like recognize a concept, understanding a concept in the moment, it's like part of your automatic world. You're just like, this is just me now, right? And the thing that we don't realize is that we are leaving kids, really vulnerable in this world by not actually helping them integrate what they learn. They feel flimsy. They feel vulnerable. They feel like houses of cards, honestly. Because and I just noticed there's just not much of a difference meaningfully from my vantage point, working with a smart middle school student and working with a senior in high school. There's not that much change. Why? Because everything that they learned, when they say, oh yeah, I learned that in 9th grade, I learned that in 10th grade, that means they saw it, they understood it at one point, but they have no freaking clue how to use it right now. Or they'd have to really dig deep to pull it up versus, yeah, it's part of my world. Right? Like that's the fundamental difference. If you make it part of your world on the test, right, which is what people pay for and people count, but just imagine learning broadly, like just that's what really counts, for life. But like people know that doing well on the SAT or ACT counts. So what we have done is evolve to be the most effective within what counts for learning. And so that's a huge factor is the integration factor. And part of the integration factor is this shared consciousness that happens between tutor and student. So imagine learning where it's not just like, hey, there's this like body of knowledge that's like external that you're trying to help someone learn. It's like, you're like, this is my perspective. This is me. And you're you. And it's exchange. So what the idea is, I learn as much as possible about my students. Like, and that's what I was going to mention earlier, is that's what I would tell parents is that just invite your children to learn by just learning about them, constantly wondering, like, I don't think I know you that well. I want to know you even better. What am I missing? Right? So I'm doing that as an invitation for students to memorize my perspective. And it's really kind of like, honestly, it's like love, basically. It's like kind of like coming together as humans and being like, yeah, this is the point, sharing conscious realities. If you learn what I care about, which is everything you need to know about the SAT, then that's great. And then I'm going to learn everything about you. I know your family, I know your brother. I know that you don't like, that friend at school. I also know everything, and exactly the way that you see yourself as a student. Like for example, like, oh, they think they know stuff a lot more quickly than they actually do know, or they're overconfident, or they're not as confident as they should be. And I'm constantly adjusting my tenor and the approach that I kind of, work with, and all my tutors do this too, to basically adjust the pace of learning so it's exactly their pace. And because that feels like incredible for kids. They're like, whoa, roller coaster ride. No more friction of school, no more clunky crap, and bad tutors, that's clunky crap too. That's the thing, is people don't realize that's not changing a kid's perception about learning because it's still annoying. And so
Yeah.
they don't trust it as much. So it's like when you have that like kind of Jedi level tutor, they're like, this is what learning is. Holy
Which
crap,
is amazing. And that's what you want them to feel. I'm curious, are you saying, like, do you do this in replacement of school, or is it just, in addition to school, or you do both?
So we're moving toward replacing school because I'm fascinated by the ideas. Like, what if we just replace school? Like, I'm toying with the idea that a lot of these kids could finish the equivalent of high school by the end of like ninth grade, that
I
age.
know.
Like that's where it's at. Like it's like I'm telling you, like 5 to 10x faster with someone like me. Something
Mm.
that's like it's you can't even imagine it. So right now we have two major things that we do at Streamline in addition to something new that we'll talk about if we want to. But right now it's test prep, SAT, ACT, ISE, HSBT, SSAT, which are your private school admissions tests for middle school and high school, and then it's the tutorial, and the tutorial is our kind of answer that to the fact that kids who are brilliant, kids who are neurodiverse, who may not even be struggling with school. They could be, they couldn't be, but they still have something special about them. They need a special kind of tutoring. And they need tutoring too. They need a mentor. These kids are all alone out there. And I think that they really, and I do think they feel a little bit alone because one thing I noticed about having your brain on fire is it limits your ability to really stay connected with other people.
Oh, totally.
So I feel so bad for these kids
Mm.
because it's the social kind of thing that gets, diminished. And so that they really need someone who gets them, who like a smart tutor who's like, not only like I know what you're going through because I've been through that stuff, and I'm,
Mm.
on the other side and I see where you're coming from and I know where you're going. And with those, we focus on three major components of learner development. And so this is what goes back to my iSavant assessment, which anyone should take. It's free, but it's the idea that everyone has an inner savant and they also have kind of like various unconscious ego responses to things, which, is just your response to what I think toxins often or just stressors is just like, like trying to deal with it. But it's basically a response that keeps you from learning. So the trick is to kind of really recognize how much you're kind of devoting yourself to that kind of unconscious ego, like kind of response versus are you in a learning state? Are you being engaging with your inner savant at the level that you could? So I think so. It's that and reading and math development and grammar and all that. So to me the things that really problem solving, communication, and who you are as a learner, I think are the core of it. And we want to use that kind of baseline to prove out, in addition to our research, that like, hey, like it's not even close to comparison. It's not even like, so of course it's worth investing in. It's just
Mm.
about the mindset. It's like instead of being efficient in treating our kids like, treating school like daycare, basically, it's like what we're not really, and we're just paying more money to feel like it's not daycare, but it's still daycare. We're
Yes.
actually doing the things that move the dial with learning. So our tutorial is our kind of our hope that we can kind of really get parents to start to realize what this can do, especially for these kind of neurodiverse kids, and then help them think, well, especially, kids who are, fourth, fifth, fifth grade, middle school. Hey, you can experiment a little bit. Let's try this out because you might find yourself in eighth grade. And if you work with us, you might be done with high school by that time. And you might think, should I still do school? Like what should I be doing here? It should
Mm.
open up these incredible options. And I think parents are at a point where they're like, I know a lot of smart parents who are like, I'm definitely sure my smart kid is not getting enough with, especially fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh graders. They're like, not doing the job, need something else. So that's what we're
Yeah.
here for. But I want to go a step further because I'm always interested in the beyond. Like forget like making things better. What about like, what if we are like at a small fraction of our potential as humans? And like, what if this has to do with it? Forget like, oh, things are so bad and I want it to be better. Yeah, that's great. But I'm saying like, there's a beyond factor here. And that's what excites me the most is like helping brilliant kids just really access. And I'm telling you, brilliance comes in many forms: emotional intelligence, and just like straight up kind of IQ, but also just insane memories, perceptual abilities. I'm telling you, people are not thinking broadly enough and not seeing how all of these things are at the gifted level are related to these HLA types. It's crazy. Like, it's like, what's your superpower? But
Yes,
right now,
superpower.
the superpower is like your worst freaking enemy for most kids because they're in a toxic state. So it's this crazy kind of like villain to superhero kind of unlocking situation, which I'm excited by. Yeah.
I mean, Ian, your passion for this is undeniable, and I am sure that all the listeners can feel that passion through the whatever means they're listening or watching this this interview. I think that is a great way to end in saying that let's just unlock these kids' potential so they can embrace their superpowers. Ian, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your passion, your knowledge, and your experience with all our listeners. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. You can find us at streamlinelearning.com is the best way to get to us. You can also find me at ian-siegel.com. And please check out my book, School Sucks, Your Child Doesn't, on Amazon. The paperback and Kindle versions are both released. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you once again for joining me today. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at ADHDthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.